Welcome back to Paint and Play Minis. I know it's been a long time and I haven't done much with the channel, but life happened in the form of me going back to school, having another baby, switching careers, and eventually moving houses. All good things, but I am ready to get back at it. To the random 30 people that subscribed during the past 2 years, a huge thank you, and to anyone new joining, welcome! And I hope you enjoyed this small corner of YouTube dedicated to making Zombicide terrain. Let's go. I really like the game Zombicide. It has some really good elements of tabletop gaming that combine imagination and strategy almost perfectly. The one thing I really have an issue with is the tiles. Not that they're bad. In fact, the artwork on each tile is very detailed and tell a unique story of what happened when the zombies first came. What I don't like about them is how flat they are, meaning no dimensionality. Of course, they made them that way so you could stack 10 of them together and ship them in a single box. When you do this though, it takes something away from the game. There's no urgency. Every room is visible. You can see where objectives are without exploring other areas. It's hard to keep yourself immersed when you have a bird's eye view over the entire map. That's why I've started this project. I want to make a 3D map of Zombicide that maintains the modularity, adds dimensionality in the form of multiple levels and buildings, and keeps the game with the element of surprise. You won't know what's in that dumpster, or behind that locked door, and you definitely won't see the horde coming after you. This isn't the first time I've attempted to make a project like this. Any time that I have attempted in the past though, there was always problems. For these ones, there was this unsightly gap between the tiles that I knew if I continued I wouldn't like it in the end, so I scrapped the project. I started making these other tiles that actually improved the modularity of the Zombicide tiles. They also fit together rather nicely instead of having these gaps between them. They're definitely not perfect, but they're a huge improvement from the past projects. Alright, I've extended this intro long enough, it's time to start crafting. What you'll need is either a poster board or a foam core. Usually you can get these from Michael's or a hobby craft store. You can also use these EVA foam squares that you can get from Walmart. They come in a pack of 4 and you should be able to make 8 tiles out of them. You will also need a piece of foam board, which is usually the cheaper, more flexible one that you can get from the Dollar Tree. And it should go without saying, but you will need your hobby knife, a ruler, some paint, and some other materials you'll probably realize halfway through. In this video, I'll be using the EVA foam squares, but the foam core boards work just the same. Start by measuring an 8x8 inch square and go ahead and cut that out. Since the EVA squares are 12x12 inches, when you cut them out, we can actually cut off the tail ends of the extra pieces. You can glue those together. They should fit together to form another 8x8 inch square. Now we can get started with the sidewalk pieces. Go ahead and use the foam board, the more flexible one, and measure out 8x1 inch rectangles, and go ahead and cut those out. There's no set amount that you need to make, but it would make it a lot easier if you just make a whole pile of them. Using 3 or 4 of these rectangle pieces, go ahead and measure out 1x1 inch squares and cut those out and make a big pile as well. There are 5 different street tiles that we can make: a straight piece, a 3-way intersection, a 4-way intersection, a turn, and a sidewalk piece. This piece will be what we place buildings on in later videos. Starting with the straight road piece, take 2 of the rectangles and glue them on both sides of the street. Be sure to remove the paper on one side and glue the paper side down. For the three-way intersection, we just need one long rectangle and two squares. For the four-way intersection, we just need one square in each corner. For the sidewalk piece, you'll have to cut out an 8x8 inch square and glue it over the base road. Be sure to remove the paper as well. For the turn tile, start off with an 8x8 inch square. Measure out an inch from the side from where you want the turn to start and where you want it to end. I found it much easier just to freehand the curve rather than trying to measure it out all the time. Don't forget the little sidewalk piece in the corner too, which is just a 1x1 inch square. With how these tiles are made so far, you can start to see how they will form together to make these maps. Onto the texturing portion, we want to use our ruler and a blunt tool for this. Starting with the front part of the curb, we just want to measure 1/4 inch out from a long piece. Then, for the individual sidewalk tiles, we just measure 1x1 inch squares. You can also freehand in some extra cracks to make the sidewalks look a little bit more damaged. For the turn piece and the sidewalk piece, you can just make a grid of the sidewalk tiles. Now that the basic texturing is done, we can add a little bit more finer texturing using the tin foil ball method. Ball up some tin foil, go ahead and roll it over all the pieces of sidewalk. Before we move on to the painting, we'll go ahead and cut out the corners of all the sidewalks, just to make it a little bit more curvier. Finally, onto the painting. We'll start with the streets. First, take some black paint. You can add in some sand for extra texturing. If you do, use less in both paint and sand than what you saw me put on. A little paint goes a long way. I like this step because you don't need to be precise with it. Just splatter on the paint as much as you can and avoid the sidewalks. The streets are meant to look a little bit worn and torn, so a little unevenness will actually look good. Onto the sidewalks. Take your gray paint and paint in all the sidewalks. Again, you don't have to be clean with it, just avoid getting it on the street portion. We're also going to be adding in the middle lines for the streets and the crosswalk pieces as well. Get some cereal cardboard box, and using the curvy piece from earlier, you can use it as a stencil once again. I found that freehanding in the curved lines works best. For the straight piece, we just need to cut out a 6x8 inch rectangle and measure out the middle lane, just like you did for the curved piece. For the crosswalk piece, a 3x6 inch rectangle should do fine. I measured out 1/4 inch for each of the stripes, but you can make them bigger or smaller. Try the pieces out and see if they fit inside the street tiles. If they don't, just make small corrections, cutting off a little bit from the side each time. I have a cheap airbrush from Amazon that I'll link in the description, but it works great for projects like this where you don't need fine detail with the airbrush. curved stencil will obviously be used for the turns. Straight piece will be used for the roads with just the straight piece, and the crosswalk will be for any of the intersections. The tiles should really start to be coming together now, but we're not done yet. Now we're going to add in even more grimy details by adding in some black wash onto the tiles. Again, you don't need to be clean with this part, but make sure you get in all the cracks and textures that you made from earlier. This will help them to stand out against the gray paint. If there's any pooling, just use a paper towel and dab it off. Make sure to focus on the crosswalks as well to make it look like the paint was worn off from people walking on it. While the tiles are drying, go ahead and mix up some gray paint from earlier and a little bit of white paint. Get a paper towel and wipe most of the paint off from the paintbrush, so we can begin dry brushing. This part is meant to catch all the textures and sand particles if you use them. This will also help them to give them contrast against the black or gray paint. And with that, your tiles are basically done. If you only made these 5 tiles, you still should be able to make some maps out of these. But if you want to make bigger maps like these, you'll need to make a bit more. I found the sidewalk tiles and the straight road pieces will be your most used. 10 of each should be enough to make big maps. For the turns and the 3-way intersections, about 3 to 4 of those. 1 4-way intersection is enough, as this is a good centerpiece to start out your map. If you use the foam core instead of the EVA foam squares, there is one extra step that you'll need to do, which is just gluing on some squares to raise the tiles up. This will help the tile sit better on the table, as there might be a little bit of warping from the paint. If you liked this video, feel free to give me a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. This will be a series of videos that I eventually want to show how to build buildings and scatter terrain for. Thank you so much for watching, survivors. Keep crafting, keep surviving, and I'll see you next time.